Right, we've not. It feels like ages since we've done this, but I know it's not. Right, what are we doing today? Firstly, hello, I suppose. Well, good. Twitch is responding with the affirmation that I am indeed streaming. I'm just going to lower the camera just a touch. There we go. That's a bit better because I tend to lean forward. You see, and instead of looking at my head, the top of my head, you can look at my lovely face instead. Hello, welcome to CodeZone episode 34. This is very good. 34. You've done 34 weeks worth of episodes then. That's quite scary, isn't it? Oh dear. We've got Seljack Trink Track Tridridria. Hello, first time, yeah. That just rolls off the tongue, that one, doesn't it? Hello indeed, yes. And it is a first time code zone for a few people. It is an odd day for a code zone. It's a Wednesday. Don't usually do Wednesdays. Well, I say that, we've actually done the last few Wednesdays, haven't we? And it's all because my life's a complete mess and I just don't know how to organise myself at all. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Right, so tonight, as you can see for the title of the stream, I'm going to be talking about trapezoidal motion. And you might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with Space Thing? Well, it actually has a lot to do with Space Thing. And that's because I want my spacecraft to travel in a fairly realistic way. And trapezoidal motion is a subject that's a little bit close to my heart. For those of you that follow along with the various parts of my life rather oddly, you'll know I work with robots and motion and motors and that sort of thing. And of course we do a lot of things where we've got to do trapezoidal motion profiling. And that's a really posh way of saying something very simple. Stuff accelerates, stuff travels at speed, and stuff decelerates. And we'll get the pens out in a minute and start having a look at some of the maths for this. So I'm just going to catch up with the chat. Who have we got? Standard Int is here. Hello. Danny Cron is here. Dractria is here. Null Alternative is here. Excellent. Good. A few people are here. What is this? What is CodeZone? Well, this is your first CodeZone, Rosso. In 34 episodes, this is your first one. I find that hard to believe. But tonight it's going to be trapezoidal motion, and specifically for Space Thing, although I'm not booting up Space Thing, because we're going to have a play with a little bit of code and try and understand it a little bit too. You've been on the ship. Yeah, it's your excuse for everything. Oh, trapezoidal motion in the form of a trapezoid for some reason. Well, we will see. What I'm going to do is pull up the old OneNote. Ta-da! Blind everybody. So, yep. Right, and I also need to make sure that I've got the appropriate pen. It's been a while since I've dug the old OneNote out. I'm going to move my mouse over there. I know that you work on ships, Rosso. It's okay, I'm pulling your leg. What is trapezoidal motion? Well, let's put it the most very simple. Now, we all know about how things move, how particles move. Stuff needs to accelerate and decelerate. We've done plenty of movement before on the channel. So we typically take an acceleration and we modify velocity with it. In fact, we can write this down, can't we? So we would normally set acceleration to something, and we would then modify our velocity by taking that acceleration and multiplying it by some sort of elapsed time. And we would do the same for our position. We would then take our velocity and multiply that by f elapsed time. And effectively what we end up doing is integrating as we go down this list. And we've done this countless times. It is the de facto standard way that things move around on the screen. The problem is it's all very well and good, but it's not very accurate. Well, that's debatable. It's not very accurate in terms of how we can do sort of estimation of the paths that we want to follow in the future. And that's a different type of kettle of fish to worry about. So if I've got, for example, a spacecraft, there we are, my spacecraft down here, and I know it's starting at this point. And I know that it's going to go to this point over here. Spacecraft don't just sort of instantly start moving. I mean, they would require all of the energy in the universe and some if they suddenly went from a standing still position to the constant velocity. And this is something that we typically do in video games. Have to be careful of going behind the screen here. And that's fine for your bat and ball games and your Pong and basic platforming games, whatever. We can even go a little bit further and do things like these accelerations to modify a velocity, and we can make it appear like it's accelerating, so it gradually gets faster and faster and faster. That's fine, perfectly fine. Conversely, we can also take a negative acceleration or a deceleration and bring something that's moving to a standing still. But in the real world, all things take time to get up to speed, travel at that speed, and then decelerate. So let's actually draw that path with respect to time and have a look at what we've got. So here is trapezium. Yeah, I'll make sure I don't go into the chat box. What have we got? Alta, hello, yes. Dandestein, hello too. We're going to have some dodgy maths tonight. Can't beat a bit of dodgy maths. So along this axis, I'm going to have time, and along this axis, I'm going to have velocity. So I'm going to, throughout tonight, I'm always assuming that my body is starting at 0. It's starting at rest, it's accelerating, travelling, and then stopping, coming back down to rest. So, why do we call it trapezoidal motion? Well, because if this is velocity on this axis, we accelerate to a certain point, we travel at a constant velocity, and then we decelerate. There we go. So this forms, naturally, a trapezium. It's a bit of a wonky OLC trapezium because I can't draw straight lines on my mouse mat. So the acceleration depends on how long ago the given input move was given. Right, well that's what we're going to talk about because there's some sort of... well, we're going to look at some maths tonight to try and work in our favour about how we can estimate these trajectories. There's still an approximation, but they're actually a fairly accurate one. We can split this motion profile up into 3 stages in this instance. So here we've got, this is our acceleration phase, which I'm going to label A. And here we've got our deceleration phase, which I'm going to label D. Now, I do actually have some scribbles on a bit of paper. Because we're looking at formulae tonight, just to make sure I don't get it horribly wrong, I have got a little bit of prep on a bit of paper, which is unusual for a CodeZone. Now, this speed here, this is going to be sort of the maximum speed that our body can travel at. So these are things that we can set. We're going to be able to set the acceleration, we're going to be able to set the deceleration, and we're going to be able to set the maximum speed. And these are scalar values in our system. Even though we're applying them to a velocity vector or an acceleration vector, merely all we're going to do is add in the direction and multiply it by these scalar values. Apostolisk, hello. You've also got the hive mind of the internet on hand. Yes, exactly. We will see. It's going to be exceptionally dodgy maths tonight. I'm probably going to break quite a few rules, but we'll see. So this leads to something interesting. I'm just going to scroll down just a touch there, because this is a bit more of the interesting part of the graph. What we can see is we've got 3 distinct phases in our graph here. So we accelerate up until we reach our maximum velocity. And we drop a line down, that becomes point T1 on our graph. We travel at constant velocity until we have to start decelerating. So depending on what our velocity is, of course, at some point we have to start braking. And we can work out what that is too, until we form our total time of movement. Now, if you're at all familiar with the basic formulae of motion or the formula of mechanics, you will be well aware of some basic principles. So, for example, acceleration is equal to your target velocity minus your starting velocity divided by time. Oh, yes, you can just about see that behind the sponsorship gubbins there in the top corner. So this is fairly standard stuff. We learn this in high school, certainly in the UK. So we can then sort of rearrange this a little bit in our favour. So we can go AT equals V take U, and therefore T equals V take U over A. Now, I'm always going to be starting from 0, so my initial velocity doesn't count in here. So this means we can quite happily assume that our T1 here is actually equal to V over A. Following along, right? I'm just going to have a slurp of hardcore beer. Speedy, hello. Captain Ashtar. Cheers, yes, indeed. It's my usual no added sugar bitter shandy from Tesco. Hardcore maths. This is not hardcore maths. It's reasonably simple maths. So this is an important step that we've got here, that T1 is equal to V over A. We know how long we have to accelerate to reach the maximum speed that we're allowing ourselves to move at. T2 is pretty much the same thing, except we know that from a maximum time we're allowing ourselves to move, it's the opposite way round. So I can sort of say T2 is equal to, I'm just going to make sure I get this the right way round, yes, it's our total time of movement, subtracting this time v over d. It's a deceleration, it's okay, it doesn't matter. There's going to be some negatives in here, they'll work themselves out. So that's quite an important thing to do too. So now we know how much time we need to accelerate up to the maximum speed, and we know how much time we need to decelerate from the maximum speed. This does of course present one sort of interesting scenario. And that is, what if we can't attain our maximum speed before we start needing to decelerate? So let's say we've said we're going to move for 5 seconds. Well, if we know that t2 is less than t1, then, well, we can't get to our maximum speed. We have to take a different approach. For example, I'll draw this in as a different colour. If our accelerations weren't quite as fast, we can accelerate and accelerate and accelerate, but we're only allowing ourselves 5 seconds for the move. At some point, we have to start decelerating. Well, that's defined by our rate of deceleration. So in this instance, we never actually reach the maximum speed. And that's because if we carry on with these lines and we look where they cross with our maximum speed value in our velocity axis, this time now t2 would be down here and t1 would be up here. T2 is less than T1. So we can identify that situation and we can handle it differently. We'll talk about that a bit later on. Is the acceleration linear though? Yes, it is linear here, and you're absolutely right, this is our assumption. In reality, what we're going to actually see when we calculate this is acceleration tends to do this up to a certain point and then decelerate like this. So in reality, things do move like that. But we can model this as a trapezoidal motion. That's okay. Right, I'm going to clear my screen a little bit. Move on. Mouse, where have you gone? Mouse. Excellent. Oh, mouse is doing its thing. There we go. So I'm going to put in back my trapezium. Again, I just want to make sure I get it on the screen where we can actually see what's going on. So there's the axis, so we've got time along here, and we've got velocity up here. Acceleration. And I'm just going to draw those slightly differently, so at least we can tell there's a different phase going on. Once we calculated before, what we calculated was the times that things were doing stuff, and that's typically what we do now in games. We hold down a key and the object starts moving. The difference in this scenario is I kind of know the distance I want to travel, and as a result, I want to sort of work out how long do I accelerate for and how long do I decelerate for in order to make sure that the motion is smooth. And this requires a little bit more thinking about. Need to model the jerk. Can the interpolation be interrupted? Yes, it can. Okay, there's a slight difference here. What I'm going to assume, okay, I should have started with this. I'm going to assume nothing is going to actually interfere with the motion of the body, and that the motion of the body is indeed ideal. If we did have an interruptive motion, one of the things that we could do is create a PID system in order to handle that scenario. And this is actually what I do for a living. So we could have the idealized model which we're creating here with our trapezoidal motion, but instead we could have things like extra forces get in the way or additional frictions we weren't anticipating, and we can compare what the real body is doing to our actual model. And if there's an error between the two above a certain threshold, that's called a following error, then we can have the system sort of crap out, or we can try and tune the system to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we can temporarily add additional accelerations and decelerations to make sure that the velocity profile of the body matches the idealized velocity profile dictated by the trapezoidal motion profile. It all gets a bit wordy, this stuff, but certainly that's a very interesting topic, but we're not going to do that tonight. Tonight we're assuming everything's ideal. And Captain Ashtar rightly points out here state machines. You're absolutely right. We've been talking about state machines recently, so we probably will try and implement this as a state machine using the state machine stuff we were talking about before, but not tonight. I've got a little bit of skeleton code which we can play with some of these ideas. But we need to sort of now think about the second half of the problem. I've got my spaceship. Let's make sure I draw this sensibly. spaceship is over here, and I want to send it from a start location to an end location. I know where those locations are in space, but what I want it to do is accelerate up to a constant velocity and then decelerate according to the parameters and properties of the ship. And it's nice to think of it like that. So in games right now, when we hold down the key, we typically start increasing the velocity with some acceleration, and we have some sort of friction or drag to eliminate that velocity, but it's not very realistic. Car games typically have this property as well, and one of the ways industry handles these problems is to make some very naive assumptions. We're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I need to draw yet another trapezium. So one of the common approaches to this is called the rule of thirds with the trapezium, and that is that all of the motion takes up directly 1/3. Now, that's rubbish, right? Because in real life that doesn't typically happen. Let's get rid of those. What body is moving here? What if they're moving to a thing which is also moving, like a planet or space station? Dan, see, there's another good point. As I mentioned before, I'm always assuming that everything is going from rest to rest. There is no sort of initial leading velocity in play here. That does add some complexity, but not a great deal. I just want to keep it a bit simple tonight. Why just stop the acceleration when you can accelerate indefinitely long time? The more speed, the faster the arrival. Because you have to brake, right? When you get there, you have to be able to stop. So, the Chazeg, hello, yes, welcome. Almighty David 2004, Merry Christmas, kittens. Channel Mouse, hello. Are we sure math and beer are okay? Probably not. You never know, it actually might make my maths a bit more accurate. So what we need to work out now is where on our profile are these sort of time points, because we know that we need to handle the craft's behaviour differently during its acceleration phase, its constant velocity phase, and its deceleration phase. Because during these constant velocity, we don't need to do anything. Acceleration, we need to apply acceleration, and deceleration, we need to apply deceleration. This makes things a little bit trickier, because in order to know where those things are, we've made this assumption that we actually know what our total time is, how long we're going to be moving for. But I don't. All I have is a distance. Now, if I wasn't taking into account acceleration and deceleration, well, that's very simple, because we've always got speed equals distance over time. That's very easy to then rearrange. So we could have, So we want to get distance on its own. So it would be speed times time equals distance. Easy enough. Simple stuff, again, done at high school here in the UK. But we don't have that here. But what we do have is this velocity profile. And if we recall before that to go from accelerations to velocities, we integrate. And to go from velocities to positions, we integrate. So we can integrate our velocity curve here, which would mean, therefore it does imply, that the area underneath our trapezium is indeed the distance that we're going to travel. Now, that means I know what the distance is I'm going to travel. So I know what the area is. I'm going to call the distance I'm going to travel S for some reason. I think that's coming from this basic formula, S equals ut. I'll draw that down here just to avoid the camera, plus half at squared. Again, another standard sort of formula in these motion equations. Catching up with the chat. I am surprised 63 people here were enticed by the word trapeziums, or trapezoidal motion. So S is going to represent the distance that I'm going to travel, and that is, of course, the area underneath my velocity profile here. So this means we can, I'm going to just also put on the screen some of the equations that we had before. So T1 equals our maximum velocity over our acceleration. T2 was equal to our total time minus our velocity over deceleration. Yes, that's right. Good. Are you considering the deceleration when you release the key or calculate the position of the object on the wall? We're not doing sort of real-time collision. So what we're doing now is plotting in advance. So if we know how far we've got to move, what are the time points during that motion where we change basically phases of the motion? When do we stop applying acceleration and start applying deceleration? So the ships in space then can move around a little bit more accurately. Just for those, T1 was there, T2 was here, and T was the overall total motion. Well, we need to start thinking about the area under this curve. So I have that. It is my overall distance, the distance between the start and the end. So S I have as my overall area. And so I'll have a section here. So the area during the acceleration, the area during the constant velocity, and the area under the deceleration phase. I know these. So if I know this area, the one thing I'm trying to calculate now is this total time value. And that's becoming a little bit trickier. Let's look at these components individually. So we know that we've got a total area, and we know what can we work out where we've got these sort of basic three sort of sections. A triangle is easier. Somebody, I think it was StandardInt, posted the area for a trapezium. We might actually look at how that relates to this, but I'm instead going to do it sort of a piecemeal approach instead. I'm just quickly glancing at my notes here just to make sure that we don't skip something that's important. Because, yes. Right. We know that this T1 here, this was the time taken to accelerate to the maximum speed. And we know that T1 is V over A. But knowing this time, we need to know what is the distance that we've travelled there, so we can subtract it from our overall distance. So actually I need to put this equation back on. We know that the distance is equal to ut plus half at squared. Well, I've not got a starting velocity, so that can disappear, and we've assumed that it's going to be 0. But we know that our t value is basically going to be t1, so we need to substitute that in. So that becomes half a. I best start using these sort of same values here, hadn't I? So we'll start using capital A for this. Is a, and we can substitute in our ta, so that becomes v over a squared. Which then becomes, work it all out, becomes half v squared over a. Everybody with me so far? Attack, sustain, decay, release. It does look a bit like that, doesn't it? Good. Okay, so we have then worked out what this area is here, which I'm going to call crudely SA, the area under the curve for this acceleration, is defined as half v squared over a. So where can I write that where you guys can actually see it? So SA equals half v squared over a. We can actually do something very similar for this section here. It's a little bit more complicated because now we've got t and t2 is the distance along the bottom of the triangle, and we know what our deceleration is. So it's actually the same formula, but using d this time. So we know that this area must be, sorry, not a plus there. We know this area, we'll call it d, must be equal to half v squared over d. Now, some of you will be starting to think, well, hang on, that can't be right. Because we know that d is potentially going to be negative. But if we go back to our acceleration formula, a equals v take u, I'll make sure that that's a bit curvier, over t, this time our starting velocity is actually our travelling velocity. It's this value here is our starting velocity. So that becomes negative. The deceleration is negative. It all cancels itself out. It's okay. We'll run with that. Maybe write that as v squared over 2a. We'll get there, we'll get there, we'll get there. So now I've got the areas for the triangle at the start, and I've got the area for the triangle at the bottom. I've now got this rather awkward one, which is this area in the middle, SV. So we know that this area is really just the area of a rectangle, and we know that the height of this rectangle is our maximum speed, and that the width of the rectangle is t2 minus t1. Well, t2 minus t1 is equal to, make sure you can, I'm not going into the camera again, t minus v over d minus v over a. You can make a small stroke at the side of the U to make it more clear as to what is a U and what is a V. Well, we don't have any U's now. All the U's have gone, right? So they've disappeared. So this SV must be then V t minus v over d, take v over a. So now we've got the sort of three components that we can put into one big equation, which breaks up the area into these three sections. But more importantly, what we've got now is a single t as part of that. So let's clear the screen here and just rewrite that out. I need to press the escape key just a second. Escape, there we go. Scroll, scroll, why won't you scroll? Thank you, OneNote, for being fussy like that. Right, so let's put these things back. So we now know that our overall sort of distance travelled, we know that value. We've now got that equal to these following components. Half, what was it, v squared over a plus half v squared over d plus vt, take v over d minus v over a. Well, we can rearrange this to try and make t the subject of this equation. If we look at this for a second, what I'm going to do is divide everything by v. So s over v equals half v over a plus half v over d plus t minus v over d minus v over a. Well, that's great. We've got some v over a's and v over d's already, so we can start to accumulate those. So now we've got s over v equals half of v over a, take a full v over a equals minus half v over a. The same applies here, so we've got minus half v over d plus t, which is great. We've got t on its own now, so we can therefore go ahead and say that t is equal to s over v plus half v over a, take half v over d. And we can rearrange that to be a bit more friendly to be t equals s over v. And now we can do it in standard ints format where we've got v over 2a minus, plus v over 2d. There we go. So by taking just our constants, the velocities, the accelerations, the decelerations, and the distance that we've travelled, we can work out how long it takes us to do that. You must disapprove of my fractions not being horizontal lines. Oh, that's pedantry. Not using colons. Not using colon. What, are we suddenly in Pascal? Do you mean? Like this. I think this is quite a neat derivation. Because it now does actually take into account all of these interesting properties. So whether it's a car or a spaceship or whatever, it's got unique acceleration and deceleration properties, and it's got a unique maximum speed. At the moment, it still assumes that we're talking in sort of a sort of breaking up the trapezium into threes. So we'll have a look. What was D again? Deceleration, yes. Matty C, hello, yes. Colons are assignments, not equality, aren't they? Oh, I guess this is the distinction between all of the different ways of teaching maths around the world. I, for one, don't call it math. Right? It's maths. There's an S at the end of it, but that's very inflammatory. So I quite like this. This is a useful thing to know. I will go back and just quickly draw a trapezium so we can identify what all these things are. Just for those that are joining in late. V, time, So we have an acceleration phase. If we're a car, for example, a car has a slow acceleration phase. If it's anything like my car, it can travel at a constant velocity, but it can brake pretty sharply. So my deceleration is quite steep. Acceleration phase, constant velocity phase, deceleration phase. And we can specify the maximum performance of my car. It's, I don't know, I think my car, the speedo goes up to 240 miles an hour. Read into that what you want. I don't think I've ever had it that fast, but potentially that's the maximum speed of the car. The acceleration and deceleration, well, they're just properties. I don't know what they precisely are for my car, for example, but for my spaceship, they're going to be pretty fast. Non-symmetric acceleration and deceleration, literally unplayable. Yes. Is there a ruler tooling one? Yeah, there is, yeah, but it means faffing around with more buttons. Tuned in just in time. Well, you've just missed the very exciting derivation of the time a particle takes according to the acceleration profile of its trapezoidal motion profile. Right now, if you've only just tuned in, you've missed some very interesting CodeZone so far. But this is quite better. I think this is better because a lot of the literature you find online makes some fundamental assumptions. They will assume that acceleration and deceleration are the same because that does start to simplify the maths. But that's just not realistic. It's just not how things actually behave. So now we've got this simple. This is remember if T1. No, that's a good point. Let's just cover this again. So there was part of the calculation to understand how we implement the motion profile is to know, do we want to do a 3-section profile or a 2-section profile? Now, a 2-section profile occurs when you can't reach the maximum velocity before you have to start decelerating in order to stop at the right place. In this instance, you need to sort of calculate where that location is and handle the two separately. So that's a 2-section profile. Today we're interested in 3-section profiles. So we're going to have T1, T2, total time, and 0. And what we've just derived is given that the distance that our particle or our car or our spaceship is going to move, knowing its acceleration properties, its deceleration properties, and its velocity properties, we can work out how long it's going to take to do that. And we can also work out when do we stop accelerating and when do we start decelerating for it to get there accurately. And that's going to mean that the spaceships will move around with a very nice easing. You can also use this in animation for tweening and interesting sort of movements around the screen. Retrograde thrusters are usually much weaker, aren't they? I don't know. Wouldn't a spaceship always do that, just accelerating until they need to decelerate? Possibly. I'm sure Ericsson would have something to say about that. You get to a point where, there is actually a limit, isn't there? There is a reason why, for example, the Voyager 1 space probe is not travelling at the speed of light across the universe. These things can't just keep accelerating forever. I think you just need somehow to keep pumping more and more energy into the system for it to do that. And is it something along the lines of it's the conversion of that energy suddenly becomes inefficient? So there is a maximum point. Yeah, we need Ericsson to answer these questions, not me. So we've done the maths bit. Let's jump onto some code. Now, I went ahead and tried to prototype this idea. So I thought we would look at some of the code. It's a very simple application. It's tested outside of Space Thing at the moment, just whilst I'm sort of trying these ideas out. Let's zoom in a little bit. So it's a Pixel Game Engine application, of course it is. On create, well, let's look at the private member variables first. I've got vStart and vEnd, and they're going to represent the start of the motion and the end of the motion in space. Direction is just a normalized vector between the start and end points. We'll see that soon. Then I've got the 3 properties of my body: position, velocity, and acceleration. And then I've got my 4 different types of time. T with a capital T is the total time the motion is going to take. T1 and T2 are those points. T1 is where acceleration stops, and T2 is where deceleration starts. And T is my current time into that motion. Good evening, Terry. You just missed out on loads of interesting maths. I know you're a bit of a maths fan, aren't you? Look at this. Check this out. Huh? Look at that. Right? That's good stuff for a CodeZone. Right? So I've also got this Boolean flag which does nothing. I can erase that now. Bye-bye. The code is very simple program indeed. I specify what my properties are. So here I've got an acceleration, I've got a deceleration. Right now I've set them to the same thing. I've also got what my maximum speed is. Now, because I'm doing everything with respect to f elapsed time, these are typically in units of pixels per second. In this instance, Dragonite rockets meet a finite speed as the particles eject out. Back is a finite speed. So there we go. See, this is exactly it. I'm pleased that it sort of spawned all of these interesting things. I just noticed how tiny the scroll. Yeah, it's tiny. Well, it's not just tiny. It's really frustrating. It's going to dazzle everybody again. That's not. It's tiny. It is tiny little thing. It's also really narrow, which is no good. How much stuff have we got in here? Ooh, dread to think. State machines. 5 dice, space thing, flying cars, no idea, more space thing stuff, simulations. It's like different types of state machines, containers. Yeah, this one was all container stuff, wasn't it? Space thing. Oh, DDA algorithms. Oh, then we go over here a bit, so I guess there's actually some to the left. We scroll over. Yep, some down here. We've got some equations, DDA stuff, DDA, collisions. Oh, what was this one? Oh, this is a MMO series. Networking part 4. We've got part 5 coming. Circle versus rectangle collisions. It's all in there. There we are, networking part 3. It's a never-ending sort of history of everything that's gone on the channel, I think. I did have to actually restart a new book because the NES emulator one started to cause much slowness in OneNote. The downside, I wanted to sort of create this as a PDF to give to people. Surprisingly, people have asked for it. Have you got a PDF of the whole thing? As a bit of a memento of what's going on. And I tried to create one, but OneNote crashed, so it doesn't happen. Acceleration is force divided by mass. You need to keep applying force to maintain acceleration. Yeah, there we go. So that's what I was sort of suggesting. You need to keep putting energy into that system. Right, so let's go back to the code. Oh, that's not the code. That's code. There we go. So, yes, I specify what my properties are. Now, remember, I said that these were scalar quantities. So they're used to modify a vector later on. And the application is very simple. When I press the mouse button, I'm going to have a particle, a body, move from its current location to the mouse's location with the correct profile according to these properties that we've set up. So as soon as I press the left mouse button, I basically reset the motion by setting everything to 0. I get the mouse pos. This is the function to keep Terry quiet. So this represents where the body has to go. I work out the direction by looking at the start and the end and normalizing it, so it gives me a unit vector. And I work out the distance, because that distance is that represents the area under my trapezium. And then I just implement the functions that we've just derived. So very simple stuff. T, the total time required to cover that distance in accordance with the acceleration properties of the body is simply that. And then we can calculate T1 and T2. And I need to calculate T1 and T2 because I'm using those in this set of conditions later on. So I reset my lowercase t, which means for this body, the motion now begins. Time is equal to 0. And then each frame, I increment it by f elapsed time. If my t is less than my t1 point, I'm accelerating. So I take my direction vector and I multiply it by my scalar a and set that to be my acceleration vector. I'm also choosing to colour the particle so we can see when it's in the different phases. If my t is between t1 and t2, I'm in constant velocity phase. So I don't have any acceleration, I can set that to 0. Remember, not having acceleration means the velocity won't change, but it doesn't mean the velocity stops as well. So I'm going to set that to yellow so we can see it during that phase. Then finally, I've got the t is greater than t2. That's in the deceleration phase. So I take my direction vector, but whatever my acceleration was, this is where I'm including the negation component for the deceleration. Because later on down here, for every frame, providing that my t is less than my overall time for this motion, which we've calculated, now the overall distance, the overall time, then I'm applying just the regular motion laws here. I'm integrating my velocity by accumulating acceleration modulated by elapsed time, and I'm doing exactly the same for position. This is the standard stuff we've been doing for years on the channel, basic movement in a computer game. And if I'm not within the time period, I'm colouring the body blue. So we'll see it change colour as it's going through different phases. Then all I've got for the rest of the program is to draw a line which shows the path the body's going to follow, and then fill a circle representing the body. And finally I'll draw the speed as well. So a very simple program. So I'm just going to have another slurp of beer and then catch up with the chat. Bwahaha, quality software right there. Can't export a PDF. It can export a PDF, it's just the PDF was so large I don't think it legitimately is represented on any kind of paper that is known to PDF. So that caused a problem. It could be that the OneNote software just didn't know how to handle so much vector information being dumped into a PDF. It was a mess. Tanrim Benin Yeptin. Huge fan of MMO series. Well, the next episode is to actually handle a bit of combat in there. And I know that the channel has sort of gone a bit dormant just whilst I'm sorting out things in my personal life. But I have been thinking, and apologies in advance, because I think that this is interesting enough that this will become a little video. I've not made a video now for about 3 months, and I was looking for just something I can do quickly, a nice little 15-minute video to sort of get back into the swing of things. And this is probably an interesting topic, I think. Make it a bit more polished and less waffle, and make sure that the maths is accurate. I think it'll be a useful video for people to have. Sort of reminds me of the envelopes from the Synth series. Well, they are effectively the same. The envelopes aren't. They're not actually trapeziums. They look similar, but they're just regular quadrilaterals because they can have. What was it for ADSR? You have an attack phase. For example, you could have something like that. Now, my understanding of trapezium is it's got to have 2 parallel sides. Otherwise, this is now just a quadrilateral. Or is this actually considered a rhombus? Rhombuses don't have to be symmetrical, do they? I don't know. Don't know. Can't remember. You read really well my name. Good. Thank you. Right. So let's run this little program and have a play with it. Let's click compile. So it's not much here. All we've done is implement the maths that I've derived into today's episode, and we're going to see it behave. Now we'll notice some interesting properties too, because it's only a 3-part trapezium solver. So this is my body in the middle, nice low resolution. I'm going to click over here. It accelerates, goes yellow, and decelerates to a nice stop. Let's go back over here. Green, yellow, and decelerates. Back down here, green, yellow's constant velocity, and decelerates. So we get a very nice motion without needing to worry about actually handling that. We can just send that on its way. We don't need to sort of continuously update it to make sure that it knows when and where to stop. It does have a problem though, and that is if we do force it to do a 2-stage motion. See, it can't, because right now the 3-stage motion means it must at least once reach its maximum velocity. So that's why it's going beyond the end of the line. But as long as the line is long enough, it doesn't need to fall back into this 2-stage solution. So we might actually have a look at implementing the 2-stage solution. We'll see how inclined I feel. We've not got a huge amount of time left to go into that. But let's play with some of the properties. So if I now change my deceleration phase to be, let's say, 50. So it's really slow deceleration. Let's click over here. acceleration. See how it starts to decelerate really early because it needs more space in order to come to a complete stop. Acceleration, constant speed, deceleration kicks in, dump, nice stop. Very nice way of tweening things around the screen. Oh, that one wasn't quite long enough. It had to, remember, it has to reach its maximum velocity at some point. That's a nice stop. And of course, we can change that around a little bit. So we could have, for example, my car can brake faster than it can accelerate. So let's set the deceleration to 100. Let's set the acceleration to something reasonably pitiful. I don't know, 20. So this would be quite slow. Might not have enough space on the screen here. Can maximum velocity be adjusted with the path length? Yes, but you don't need to. Because we know the time, because we know where T2 and T1 intersect on our graph, we can then simply just start decelerating. So we don't need to actually change anything about the maximum velocity. So yes, in this case, simply just not enough space to satisfy that equation. So accelerating, 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 and then straight into deceleration. That was just about the right length, so that was no good. Now let's change that back to... let's change the maximum velocity this time. Well, in fact, we'll up all of the numbers. So we'll have U set to 500. There we are. Acceleration 200 and set U to 200 too. There's a much faster body this time. Very nice. One of the things we can try doing, well, why not? We should do this. Let's set the acceleration to 200 and 200, and set that to 100. If we don't clear the screen each time, we should be able to see it leave a trace of when it was accelerating and decelerating. Andy S89, it's all very interesting. Yeah, I think so. I think it's useful stuff. Alex, good evening. So if I go over here, green is the acceleration phase, red is deceleration. And we're just leaving it to it. We've now calculated those time points required. We're guaranteed that the motion is nice. Oh, this is actually really nice. You can draw these sort of funky shapes now. I like that. I like that a lot. So we can see that it doesn't matter how long the motion is, the acceleration and deceleration times, they're always the same. And that's to be expected because it accelerates up to the maximum velocity and then travels at that velocity for as long as it needs to until it starts needing to decelerate. I like that. Let's change the maximum velocity now to 300. Yeah, this we might find some problems here, but let's have a look. Yes, that's what I was thinking. So it couldn't actually achieve the maximum velocity there. Maybe we can just fit one on screen. No, not at all. So trying to hit that maximum velocity, it just can't do it. Can't do it at all. Let's set that back to about 150 then. Well, it could do it if we increase the accelerations and decelerations. We'll go back and try that again. So yes, now you see we've got longer acceleration and deceleration phases because it's got to accelerate up to the velocity that we've specified. So if we go back to 300 here, and naturally let's double those. So the particle's moving around very quickly now, but maybe it should be able to handle that. Have a look. Oh, maybe also. Oh, maybe. There we go. We got a little bit in. Not quite. So we definitely need that two-stage handling scenario, just to make this so we know that the body always reliably stops where we need it to stop. It looks like one of those kids' toys where the parts rotate. I actually know precisely what you mean. A little bit overshooting. Yeah, it's overshooting because we're not calculating a two-stage approach. So what I should really be checking for in here is if it is a two-stage approach, then we need to check for T2 being less than or equal to T1. So if T2 is less than T1, then that becomes it's a two-stage solution. So let's try doing that. So two-stage equals true. You know what? because I know people are going to complain. There we go. Is everybody happy now? Is that better? That's a false. Exactly what I end up doing. Playing with the parameters for like 3 times as long as it took to develop. Lots of fun. That's the beauty of coding. That's exactly how I like to code things anyway. Right, so if it's a 2-stage solution, then this is all a bit different. So let's do if not 2-stage, then we just want to do what we did before. Come on. There we go. Let's do everything we were doing before. That stays the same. Up to here. Else, if it is 2-stage, then we need to look at things a little bit differently. Yeah, you can't win, right? You've got to pick one or the other. You could use ternary operators everywhere. Beautiful. Right, so what do we need to do in this event then? We need to look for the intersection points to give us where these things intersect in our axis. Let's go back to our OneNote for a second. Let's start sketching this out. It's probably we're going to run out of time, but we'll see. So what we've got now is a situation where we know we've got to accelerate, but we know we've also got to decelerate for our total time. These equations haven't changed from before, but what we're looking for is this point of intersection here. So that becomes T2, that becomes T1, and this becomes sort of, T3. It's a new time point. So what were the equations for these lines? Let me just go back to my notes here. So T1 was V over A. So T1 equals V over A. T2 equals T minus VD. T2 equals T minus V over D. But they're not useful in their own rights, are they? What we want to do is represent these as lines. Hang on, I shall consult with a different set of notes. Okay, yes, very good. You see, the guys don't appreciate. Actually, stuff goes into this, right? You have to start sketching these things out before you just go live and start sort of prattling about with them. Intersection calculation. This maths is melting my brain. Sorry, Danicron. Yeah, it can be a bit a bit heavy. It's reasonably simple algebra stuff. But because I'm sort of slowly running out of time, I'm worried. Yeah, I don't have a squared ruled book. Unfortunately, you can get black and reds, but they're difficult to get the squared ruled ones here in the UK. Right, so what am I trying to demonstrate here? Right, if we represent these as lines, then we know we've got good old y equals mx plus c. I think this is where I want to go with this. Is that right? Let's quickly look at these. So if right, so we want to look for the position. Let's look at our acceleration line first. So we can represent this line for our acceleration phase as y equals mx plus c simply by looking at the s equals. So this is acceleration over time, right? So that becomes y for our acceleration equals at plus 0. So the gradient is our acceleration, t is our x, and it intersects with the y-axis at the 0 point. So that's one of our lines, y equals a, t, 0. The other line's a little bit more complicated because it's going the opposite way round. So in this instance, it's y for d would be, our gradient in this case is, minus d times t. But we need to work out where our intersection point is. Well, one thing that we do know is that when t is the total time for our movement, we intersect the y-axis at 0. So we know that in this case, 0 is equal to our minus d little t plus d big T. So this becomes our c component. So we can represent that line as yd. There we go. Once we've got, obviously, these two components... Oh, hello. Screen is moving. Why is the screen moving? Bring that back. You can sort of use T1 and T2 here. Yeah, so but I think what we'll see is this actually resolves into something very nice. So now we can put one of these equal to the other. So we know on one side we've got AT, and on the other side we've got minus DT plus D overall time, big T. And what we're trying to work out here is what is the little t in this instance. So in this case, we want to get those together. So what have we got? This becomes AT plus DT equals big DT. So this becomes A plus DT equals DT. Therefore, I'm going to not scroll down anymore. Therefore, our Sorry, wrong one. We're going for little t, aren't we? Yes, little t. Therefore, t is equal to dt over a plus d. So this represents our t3 point. So that's the time point where there is a crossover between the acceleration and deceleration. So let's bang that into our code and work with that too. dt over a plus d. Right. So t3 equals d times t over a plus d. If it's a two-stage. May have to be careful for... No, we don't. Shouldn't have to be careful for divide by zeros there. So you can see we're going a little bit off script now, so that's why I'm sort of slowing down a bit. So we'd like to add in to T3, and now we can just check to see is T one side of T3 or the other. So if T is less than T3, we want to do exactly the same. This is the acceleration phase. Else we're in the deceleration phase. We only have those two states. We never get to travel at constant velocity. So that should be enough. Is a plus d ever 0? No, because we don't represent d as negative. That's actually absorbed into the calculations later on. If d equals a plus d equals 0. Only if they're both equal to 0. Right, let's try that. So this should what we should have sorted out here is small motions. Fingers crossed. It's all a bit new. So we've got regular motion. Oh, it's not quite going into the two-stage. Why is that? No, it looks like everything is going into two-stage. Let's just put the numbers back to something I can understand. Let's go back to 200, 200, and 100. Make sure that that's working. Was there a yellow then? There we go. So that's three-stage. Three-stage. Do a little one. Little one. Still a bit of overshoot. Oh, this is because now my total time is going to be inaccurate, isn't it? because my total time is assuming that it's... let's go back to the OneNote. Total time is assuming that it's behaving like a normal trapezium. So when we're breaking this down, we've got this middle section, so we're probably getting all sorts of interesting things going on. That's going to need a little bit of thought for handling that. And I guess that'll have to be in the next episode. Oh dear, what a shame. The last one was 3-stage. Yeah, it was kind of right. T3 divided by T is the right value, but T needs adjusting. I think this is the reason, is I'm still calculating T based on it being a 3-stage solution, which I guess we'll have to have some intelligence to kind of work out which approach should be applied. You may have to calculate both. The nice thing is you only have to calculate these things once during the entire duration of the body moving, because once you know these points in time, then the rest is trivial. I quite like that. So okay, not entirely perfect yet. So also just make sure that that's not the case, because I am sort of working in a low resolution integer space. Is it just sort of clonking out a bit? Yeah, it looks like it still requires a bit. It's on the whole it's accurate, but it does require a little bit more of a run. So I go there. So yeah, really close ones, no good. Don't know. I will dig into that and I will post some results. No doubt the community will also get stuck into it as well. Like it. So there we go. A whole stream, an hour's worth of trapezoidal motion maths. Now if you've enjoyed that, come and have a chat on the Discord server. Oh, I've not done this for months, have I? What do I usually say? What do I say? I say, if you've enjoyed this stream, please give me a big thumbs up, have a think about following, and come and have a chat on the Discord server. Until then, I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.